All right, this session is now being recorded. I'd like to call the Governor's UAS Council meeting to order on January 6, 2021. We'll start with a roll call. Dan Olson.
I am here.
All right, Stacy Zyliak. Not sure I said that correctly. I don't see it on the list. Dustin Temple. Corey Hoffland. Trying to look at the list here too. Who just joined here? All right, James Strait.
Here.
Jason Smith is no longer with us. Jen Fowler.
I'm here.
Mike Bosman. I thought I saw him. He's in the list. Okay. Steve White.
Here is I was using the wrong ID. I guess this is the ID I should be using every week?
Yeah, I sent out a new Zoom link. I kind of wondered if you got caught on that last week when we were going to have a little work group session.
Yeah, because I tried dialing in on the other one, but nobody was there but me.
Yeah, sorry, Steve. I thought of that about, we didn't really, we ended up having the meeting go very long. I thought about that about 20 minutes afterwards, and I jumped over to see if you were hanging out in there, but you were already gone.
Okay, well, so are we going to use this in the future?
Correct. This is the new medium.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Let's see, Wesser. Joe Froelich.
Here.
And myself. And it looks like we have another guest in there with Chris Stump.
Yes, sir. Thanks for letting me join.
Absolutely. So just for is there any other public members attending or public people?
No, this is Mike, though. I finally figured out my mute button. Sorry, Craig.
No problem. The nice thing about Zoom is most of the time you're identified. Calling on your cell phone, then we have to guess. So Chris, just so you know, so you'll be considered a member of the public, and there'll be an opportunity for you to speak as needed, or if, of course, if James wants to lean on you for something, he's more than welcome to do so. All right, there's been a couple changes in the council, and I believe there's a couple more. Obviously, Jason Smith was Governor's Bullock's appointee for the Bureau. What was his? I think it was a Native Policy Advisor or something like that, his title. So being a new person having to join for that. And my understanding is there was a change over at DOJ, and Butch Huseby is no longer with us. I just learned that this morning, so his spot will be open as well. So we'll jump into the council discussion. The past 2 weeks, we did not officially meet. The day before Christmas, even though we kept it on the calendar, most members did not show up, which is no surprise there. I had considered canceling it anyway, so that was fine. And so we just considered that one canceled. And then the week after was a work group session for anyone that showed up. There was only 3 or 4 of us that showed up for that as well. So we really did not do any business there also. Just update folks, the memo again was sent for section 1 of our objectives, which I will here bring up on the screen for folks. Section 1, procurement process recommendation, that memo was sent to Governor Bullock. I don't know that they took any action on that before leaving office. To my knowledge, they did not. What will happen? They did sign an updated executive order. As I mentioned to the few people that showed up last week, my understanding it was actually the last executive order that Governor Bullock signed before leaving office, which is basically just updating the council, continuing it through the end of September of next year. Well, actually, I believe it continues through 2022. The time frame to develop the MUAS plan was extended through September of 2021. So that gives us 9 months to get this finalized. My thought when chatting with folks here was that we could probably get it done in 6, but given session and everything, it just seemed, why not give us an extra few months if we get it done early? Fabulous. And in some ways, I think we're actually even potentially closer than that, depending on the progress we can make here over the next couple months. However, looking this morning, all the executive orders from the Bullock administration, of course, have been removed as Governor Gianforte has established his presence on the website, which is fine. I actually noticed he already has his first executive order out the door. I don't know where to find the past executive orders yet. I could not find on the site. I'm not sure they've actually been posted. So currently I don't have a copy of the current executive order on that. I also have not had contact yet with, I believe her name is Libby, let's see here, Leanne, hold on. Leanne Taylor, who's a new boards and nominations appointee for Governor Gianforte's office. Because there's so many boards and councils, DOA recommended that we not all swamp her at once. But I do plan to reach out to her and chat about this council, some of our vacancies, and the new governor's intention for the council to continue to move forward. Obviously recommending that we continue our good work, as especially in the sense that this council is not a partisan one per se. We're doing something that shouldn't be too difficult when it comes to politics. So that said, that's where we stand. So we'll continue with the work that we have currently going for the time being until we hear otherwise, so that we can maintain the guidance for the state. The one thing the new executive order did add that was not in the other one is that the council would remain and be a guidance group, for lack of a better term, at the moment for state agencies when it comes to questions about policy and implementation of UAS operations through state agencies in the state of Montana. So the council is being looked to as the shall I say experts in this for how Montana should be handling these things. So if an agency has a question on something, they're welcome to bring it to the council for consideration to incorporate into our recommendations as we go forward, which we're trying to do a lot of that as we speak anyway. All right, any questions on any of that before I continue and pause, make sure people can hear me?
Craig, let me ask you a quick question. Is that the document that you sent in that we consider final, is that's sitting out on in Teams someplace, right?
Yeah, it is. I have not, and I was remiss at getting this done. Like many of you, it is a busy time as we start legislative session, everything. Let me jump over to Teams here real quick if I can. Not gonna find it. I tend to have too many windows open at once, and Zoom must have a limit on how many windows it can let me pick from. It is in it's still called the memo draft. I have to rename it. I should probably do that soon because it ends up being a timestamp every time you touch these things in that sense. It's under the procurement discussions channel and under files, and it would be the newest file out there, UAS Council Procurement Recommendations Memo Final, and then it says draft in large letters. I have to remove that.
Okay, thanks.
Nope, I'm just gonna be a little bit slow for me. Any other questions? All right. In fact, I will do that right now. I'm getting rid of the draft words, and it will just be final. All right. So for discussion today, we're going to continue on with the objectives again, and especially for, well, I don't know that our new members actually showed up today. But just a review for folks, or we'll pick up after we dust off from the holidays. So we're working on section 2, developing the MUAS plan. We already have 2 draft documents out there addressing points 1 and point 2. One is the centralization policy recommendation version 2, which is in that channel of the centralization channel in Teams. centralized coordination channel. And the other one is UAS Council Citizen Interaction Draft Memo. So policy recommendation version 2 will have to get coordinated into the memo. I believe from our previous discussion, we were thinking we would fold these both into a single memo addressing these two sections so that we have one memo for section 2 of the executive order in total. So I'm going to try to see if I can share those two. Let's see if I can just do this way. So you're going to see what my screen looks like here with all my documents open. The two memos we're going to look at here are, or two documents, is the citizen interaction memo and the centralization policy going forward here. So the item I'd like to open up for discussion first is number 2 of the objectives that we're working on right now. And that would be the centralized records of all UAS gear. So I'm going to actually, oh yeah, you can see this because I'm sharing on the screen, right? So FAA compliance, we have addressed that somewhat here in the centralization policy recommendation. We have a section on that. I would recommend that we probably bolster that a little bit more with the language that was in that final policy memo that we sent up, and is over here in the memo for the citizen interaction already. So basically giving a little history to the origination of the FAA and the act that formulated that, giving it the authority over the airspace. So I'd recommend that we actually combine that piece of the history along with the statement we had here that we developed early on. I think this was, I don't know, we touched this in September, Jen, that the FAA has full legal authority. So that would establish where the authority comes from and that they have authority, and then basically finalize that with a statement that as such, all state agencies must comply with FAA rules and regulations as outlined at, and we send them to the FAA site right here or over here. Any other thoughts or comments people have around FAA compliance that we should be considering? We also spoke last week a little bit for the couple people that are there about the new release that the FAA took on taking positions on some of the recommendation policies, allowing for some night flying beyond line of sight and such. I think I sent that email out to the council. Hopefully folks had a chance to look at that. But I believe those changes would also relate back to the FAA site. And so as long as we're pointing people back there, we should be, and that's not the point, is that we're not reiterating this, so we're pointing people back to the source so that as those changes occur, people are able to keep up to date, and so is our recommendation. All right, so the next topic then is centralized records of all UAS gear. I don't see in here that we actually address this well in the policy recommendation document. It goes to training. The only thing that is close to, no, that's this next one. So it seems like we seem to have skipped or missed centralized records of all UAS gear.
Didn't Jen have something? I thought that was part of the first thing that we did. She had some things attached as appendixes or something like that. Maybe that's not what was in those, but I thought it was, I thought there was some records of the gear. Maybe it was just maintenance, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're right, Steve. I'm not sure. I'm trying to pull up Teams now so I can see what's up in there.
There was something in there.
There was something in there.
You had two versions of the policy recommendation. The first one is no longer there, it seems. So I don't know if it was in that and we got lost it or what happened here, but I don't see us in that now. And
I am looking for that.
so I do see under that subcommittee document that it should not be a separate issue. Centralized records will be kept through parts C and D of the list. Okay. So maybe that was the thinking, is that that would be incorporated, transfer of ownership and coordination, cooperation, communication.
I think it was a maintenance log and then airworthiness log, I think is some of the things we talked about. I think a pre-flight check, maybe, something like that.
Yeah, I would think we should have some kind of, at least a statement, since it's in the executive order addressing that topic, outlining at least what FAA requires us to have as a record for missions with UAS, anything the state would want to. So for example, the record of the cost benefit analysis that we just recommended in the procurement memo, in that memo, we recommended that remain in the hands of the agency's central financial officer or authorizing authority, and ready to be produced if requested by the auditors or the legislature or executives or somebody. Right, but we on the procurement, we recommended that it remain within the agency since it's their authorized budget and their approval of the cost and benefit analysis that was conducted within that agency. So we could go with a similar track with other documents of pre-flight, post-flight checklist, maintenance records and such. But the audit and the executive order talked about a centralized record of these things. And so should there be a central repository where these are kept and able to be reviewed by the oversight authority for whether it's a council or an agency or what, that seems to be the intent there.
Well, I'm kind of confused by the language because it could have two forms. One form would be just a simple inventory list like the motor pool. This is the, the serial number. This is the date that it was acquired. This is what agency is using it and so forth. But then I guess if you could also read that as all the records attached that are pertinent to that particular unit. Could be everything, could be maintenance records, so I don't know which way that goes. I mean, the easiest thing is just a simple database of just, what is it that the state owns? And then maybe a reference number as to where you can find a file on that piece of equipment if you want to dig in, drill down into it. I don't know.
So here in the executive order language itself, it does state creating a centralized record of all state-owned UAS equipment and software, its location, and the controlling agency. So those other documents aren't necessarily
Okay.
incorporated in that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But perhaps we as a council recommend that each agency maintain those records, which if the FAA is already requiring that, it's somewhat redundant, but we might just call that out, that's where those reside unless requested by, or should be ready to be produced, I think is how we put it in the other memo.
Well, then that's the advantage of the council is that those other records that are attached to each of the pieces of equipment would have some continuity so that whether it's DNRC or DEQ or whatever, that you would expect to see the same general information for each piece of equipment, maintenance records and what do those records look like and return on investment. And so there's some guidance there for each of the agencies so that everybody's kind of on the same page. I guess that might be the route to go. So
In the policy recommendation there on the right side of the screen to us looking at it, there's a sentence at the end under the FAA compliance. So it's not stated as separately, but it talks about establishing documentation protocols by agency. But I think the other thing to consider here is this, something that James has looked into is something like air data. If there was a software program that everyone in the state could use, it will keep track of all this documentation centrally.
yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, and that kind of brings up a little bit of a challenge for state agencies, and I suspect is partly why Chris Stump is here also from DEQ, because we've had some discussions with them with DNRC. Recently, Esri reached out to the state and did a show and tell of their site scan. software, which they've been developing. They had highlighted it some back in their user conference in the summer, and apparently now it's rolled out for full production. And apparently, and I haven't seen it. I actually have a meeting this afternoon to learn a little bit more about it. And I don't know, Chris or James, if you guys have I think you guys were in the previous show and tell on it, but it sounds like it's fairly comprehensive on doing what air data does, along with programming of flight data and post-mission reports and things, and sends it all to a Esri cloud storage space so that it's easily collected there from state agencies, which has some advantages, because then it makes it really easy to have a centralized repository. They've already kind of set it up that way. And I don't know if air data has the same stuff. I'm not the expert on that. So
Yeah, air data is not data collection. It's strictly for recording activities done with the drone, maintenance, flight logs, checklists, that kind of thing.
And so I think, James, you mentioned the other day when we were talking and Jen, one of the challenges of having a single software solution where it's really great. Apparently, SiteScan requires an iOS operating system to integrate with, and DEQ doesn't use iOS; they use Android devices, and so it becomes a little more difficult than just plugging in software. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and another thing is that SiteScan won't do volumetric calculations on the fly, where something like Pix4D, which we currently use, does.
Yeah, and I got a little bit of high level at a call last week on some of that stuff, and started suspecting that SiteScan may not be quite ready for prime time. That Pix4D would still have a role or something similar to that for some of that stuff as well. So, but when it comes to centralization of records or certain records, do we want to get into specifying this is the software use of the format? Typically, a state has a challenge on that. And it's a little easier to say, here's the data you have to collect however you collect it, and have it presentable in a format that can be assimilated or disseminated between the state agencies or by the authorities that want to look at it. Mike, you guys have a more developed program. Let me pick on you. What do you guys do for centralizing your mission records and things?
Well, we're actually working on similar strategies right now. I mean, a lot of the things we're doing are mirroring what the council is doing, because our engineering division primarily is our UAS users, but as the use is expanding to other divisions, we're finding the need to solve that same problem. So not a lot right now, but work in progress.
Yeah, and I think at DNRC we're in a similar place where we have several different divisional programs that are starting to acquire drones for their use, and we're realizing. In fact, I asked for a meeting this week or early next that we start addressing what our internal policy is going to be on who does what with the data to make sure that that we can try to get ahead of this before we're overly hurting cats on this one. So I know DEQ is using air data. Is MDT or other agencies that are using air data then for their pre-flight reports?
Just quick correction, Craig, we're not using air data. It's been stopped.
You want to use air data?
Want to use air data, yeah.
So to kind of echo what James has brought up, air data is stuck in our ITPR processing, but and again, I'm just speaking on DEQ's behalf, but we're at a really unique position where we are interested in looking at all these different available platforms because, like you mentioned, Cray, we're in this position where we can kind of get ahead of what people are doing in the agency and better manage and effectively distribute it to both internal staff and to outside agencies and project stakeholders. And I guess one thing that I'm really going after, and it's platform agnostic at this point, but there is a lot of interest right now in SiteScan, and since we do have such a vested interest in utilizing the entire Esri stack, we've got a really good relationship going with them right now where if there is something missing from site scan that is, relevant to DEQ and as to what we're talking about here in this meeting, I think that they'd be totally open to developing that in their platform, so that we can get everything in one place. Because I'm more after establishing consistency so that we can effectively distribute, share, and consume everybody's data if they choose to do so.
Yeah, yeah, no, and it certainly makes it a lot simpler and less of a headache if we're all able to plug in the same platform. So thinking about how the council would do this, because we're an advisory council, we would probably recommend that the state use one or two established platforms for this reporting, but leave it to the executive policy makers to determine if there's going to be an enterprise choice of what flavor to use, like so many other pieces of software, is I'm guessing how it goes. For council to recommend one particular brand of software probably has some other issues with it, both from a procurement standpoint and following state law on that, and as well as the perception that why would the council recommend a particular vendor, even though Esri's not paying me to say that, or AirData is not paying me to say that. There can be challenges on that too. So
I would just throw out that maintaining flexibility, I think, is important across agencies. And particularly, I guess I just caution with offering up one vendor doing everything can be a little bit of a challenge. So having flexibility within choices, more than one software suite to do multiple different things, and really focusing on what is the question to be answered there. Is it maintaining, records for pre-flight? Is it actually planning a mission, software used for that? Is it processing software after the fact? So I guess, again, I'm just saying flexibility, I think, would be a good recommendation from the council.
yeah, I agree. And Jen, you guys developed your own checklist and reporting stuff. Is that correct? No, you're using AirData. What are you doing?
We're using AirData. We're using that but that's only to record inventory.
Oh, we record your inventory. Okay.
In past flights, we have information on what we did during our flights, but it's really only used for inventory. We don't use it for data analysis or processing.
So it sounds like we have two different pieces here. Was creating a centralized record of the equipment and software, which doesn't take as much feeding and watering, and then the other documents that need to be created pertained around mission control. The centralized records of equipment sounds like it needs to be or should be recommended to be a centralized record, which I think is part of the audits and the legislative audit division's concern was that does the state even know how many of these things we're buying and how much money we're spending on it, versus the internal documents, which perhaps the recommendation would be they should be remaining internal to the agency operations and mission control, but must be available to be produced upon request, whether it be the director of DOA or the legislative audit division or whoever might request that under pertaining permissions law, should be able to get access to those things unless there's something sensitive in those, which I'm not sure there would be in general, but and so we'd recommend those remain internally to an agency, but just make sure that they have them and are keeping them in following FAA guidelines and such. Am I going down the path that the council thinks would be what we would recommend on this?
Craig, this is James. Do we need to spell out for the equipment what is included in UAS equipment? Because of course we have the craft itself, the controllers, batteries. Do we need to keep those lists as the equipment? Also, do any computers associated with processing or devices like tablets and phones used for operating, do all those fall into that list of equipment?
What do folks think?
Well, if there's I mean, are you talking about if they're interfaced? Is that, are you just, I mean, like, I guess if you're saying a tablet or like an iPad, you're talking about the iPad that would be used to fly with?
Yeah, your ground control station, basically.
Okay, so is that an iPad that is exclusively used for that, or is it just happens to have the software on it and you just grab it and throw it on?
I don't think many agencies have a single use device like that. I mean, if you have a phone or a tablet, it's used for everything.
That's kind of what I was thinking. So I don't know, maybe it could be maybe something to be referred to, because I think you could run into some difficulty of, if it was acquired solely for that purpose, but if you've got 5 iPads sitting around and they're all ready to go and you just grab the one that's charged up and you take off with it, it could be complicated if you somehow showed that there's 5 iPads for this one UAS. So there could be reference to it, but that would be my only concern. When I fly, I mean, I don't use an iPad. I have a specialized screen that only is good for that. And so in my case with the Crystal Sky, it would become a part of the equipment, but an iPad might, or it's certainly an iPhone probably isn't, you certainly wouldn't want to attach it to that. And if you have to remove that from the inventory and sell it or something, then there could always be a lot of head scratching, like, well, how come we're not selling the iPad with it or something like that? I don't know. Just keep it simple, I guess.
Yeah, I think it would be good not to get overly into the weeds on some of that. I suppose I would look at it and say if it was dedicated for a UAS system, then we would include that into it. When you get down to batteries and extra propellers and such, I don't think anybody's into minutia on these things. It probably, realistically, if we're going to keep it to these 4 things for a centralized record, I would propose, if you purchase the drone and 3 batteries and a pack of propellers, you just combine that as a DJI Phantom Pro 2 and accessories for a cost of $2,800 or whatever it is. If you're purchasing software like Pix4D, you have that listed. Location, Helena or Miles City, wherever you're keeping this one, and the controlling agency, MDT. They don't list on there the cost, but that's going to be the next question. If we decide not to track that centrally as well, the initial purchase price and the date of the purchase, that's going to be a request that comes back at some point, right? And then you're going to have to go back to all those agencies and say, dig it up. Well, how much was it? Because the auditors want to know the total cost. And so we might recommend that as a centralized record. So it seems like on this, what we need is to determine what information should agencies be reporting centrally, and then where's that going to get stored? And as far as where it gets stored, if we've been talking about MDT playing a role in this, so it may be something that they collect from the agencies and have that stored in a document, a sheet, maybe even post it externally, transparency wise. I don't know. We can talk about that too.
You just mentioned the word dedicated. Maybe that's the way the angle is, that just to have make sure that it's delineated really well on the document, that would just say, dedicated peripherals or dedicated components or whatever. And then maybe in italics, just say that, there are probably some other items that are not dedicated that are used with the equipment, the UAS, but they're not dedicated. And so that could be how you differentiate between what to include as far as the equipment of the agency or not. Because chances are, if you sell the Phantom the controller that you're not going to sell the iPad with it. You know, you're gonna keep that. And if the iPad gets out of date and you get a faster one, then you don't want to have to mess around with the inventory sheet to put a different iPad in there, especially if it's being used for a lot of other things in the department. So
I like that.
dedicated would be good. Just so everybody understands that doesn't know anything about UAS, is that these are the components that are used solely for the purpose of the agency's flight, and there's other components, and I think you've got those other components probably on another inventory sheet someplace, just as you know, like a PC sitting on the desk, that you've got a list of all this other stuff. It could be really complicated if all of a sudden it shows up on 2 sheets.
Yeah, I like that language, Steve. That makes sense. Then it's easy for
Yeah.
people to decipher too.
So thinking about that, since the council actually is administratively attached to the Department of Transportation, Mike, should the MDT have a dedicated space for storing this information that falls under the purview of the council? Then is that how we would go about that, so that we set up that sheet with MDT, and whether it's stored another space? I'm not sure how that would work for administrative attach and the oversight piece.
Well, we could find certainly a way to store it. I guess I'm sitting here thinking about how sophisticated of an application are we talking about? Who would need access to it? What kind of access would they need? And all the details that we don't really talk about, that turns this from a quick and dirty little spreadsheet into a bigger IT project. So,
Right.
And maybe it starts small and evolves depending on funding and staff availability. But yeah, it's certainly something we could help with, as long as expectations of a real sophisticated application are set pretty low at this point, just because of other priorities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, to start with, I'm thinking, yeah, the simple spreadsheet thing, right? And just start, listing out in a spreadsheet how many devices are out there, and just make sure agencies are reporting it and reviewing it every 6 months or so. If you buy anything else, you need to report.
Yep. I think that kind of level of investment is easy enough to support.
You know, you're really not dealing with lots and lots of lines on a spreadsheet. And in a perfect world, if everything were in a centralized location, I could visualize it as just simply a spreadsheet with the agreed upon columns and the headings, and then each agency is a tab. I mean, if there was just one spreadsheet, that's how you could do it. And then so each tab is that, but access to that becomes complicated because it's all in one central location, unless it was somehow like an online resource, and something like Teams, where you could just get in there and there'd be a document for each agency, and they could just keep track of it. But the beauty is, I mean, you don't have thousands and thousands. Well, you better not have thousands of UASs, but it's a pretty limited number, so it's be pretty simple to keep track of, and it really should only change pretty much if something leaves or comes.
Yeah, I think we could use Teams to manage the content and publish it to a public space monthly or bi-monthly or something.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Maybe it's even just as simple as using the OneDrive and having a shared document to all the managers.
Yep.
Or you could have, if there's 10 agencies, you could have 10 documents, and each document is the responsibility of that agency, and anybody else can look at the other agency's documents. But that if you're going to be modifying your document, that you're responsible for it. And I don't know if you can lock others out of modifying it. They could just look at it. That way there's an assurance that nobody's messing around with. Nothing would be worse than they think they're working on their document and it's another agency's document, and they've added a record or two and then realize they're in the wrong spot. So.
Yeah. Well, and I know DOA has done this in different flavors for state agencies to report different things up into a central location. I think they do it through a SharePoint site. Like Mike said, I'm not really interested in getting into something overly complicated for
Right.
something that should be fairly simple, at least for the next couple of years. You know, where this all goes in the future, it could take off and needs to get more complicated in that sense for some reason, or you know, because there's a few other ways that we do this in other areas of the state, right? I mean, in some ways, if it's coded properly on the purchase, you can ping Sabres and do a query there and pull all the ones out of the state, but that generally has error prone depending on how a purchasing person has coded that stuff going in, and so you miss stuff. Reporting, the self-reporting thing is a challenge, but still, I don't see a way around that here from state agencies to report in on stuff. All you can do is remind them that you need to know to keep it updated, and for how long is that useful. I just hate to have a process that's redundant that what people are already doing. So if there's going to be redundancy, I'd like it to be as minimal as possible. Just the basic information is what they're asking for, just to keep track of how many devices the state owned and how much have they spent on. I think this one really goes back to the audit division's thoughts that there could be a pool of devices that would be more cost effective than each agency purchasing one. We kind of addressed that already in the procurement memo, recommending that not be the path right now. That it didn't make sense because of the other expenses around that. So I'm a little sensitive on that factor as well too. But it would be good to know which agencies are investing more heavily in it as we go forward as well. You know, if somebody wanted to do an MOU with another agency, that would be a list to go to, say, all right, who's got the most devices, who's doing this actively, you know, and then go call them up. All right, so let's be thinking about what data items we would want reported centrally on that stuff. It lists those 4. So we might give a little guidance to that, whether it's that we start off with a simple spreadsheet or something. You know, a couple other items that we may want to recommend collected, like data purchase might be a good one, just so people know. And eventually probably something to track if they dispose of it, which gets into those other appropriate reporting procedures for procurement, training, use, transfer, and disposal. We get into in C and D here. And so how much of that is centrally located to, and is that part of the overall centralized record piece that we're talking about, that agencies do or do not need to report on all these other items as well for training and use. If we're collecting the acquisition of it, we certainly probably want to have the opportunity for them to mark one as disposed, so it doesn't hang out there forever that they own one that's 8 years old when it was disposed of 4 years ago. And then, so we'll have to address the recommendation for what is collected, and then we might think about some statement of recommending what isn't collected but needs to be maintained by the agencies, that they should also be following. Jen, because of your experience with the FAA, how challenging will it be to come up with a list of the requirements of that kind of documentation that FAA requires for you when you do a mission, the pre-flight, post-flight, maintenance records, stuff like that? Is there like 3, or are we talking there's like 8 of them out there, or what? Anybody know? Steve, or?
I'm not sure.
You mean as far as coming up requirements that the FAA just asks us monthly?
I mean, like what type of things you need to be tracking and documenting?
Yeah, we have a list that I can throw together. It's about, I'm off the top of my head here, about 6 items that we have to keep track for each. It's each aircraft, and then we have to report each pilot that flew. We don't have to name the person. We just have to say pilot 1 and pilot 2, and how many hours the aircraft was on, how long it flew, and how long the ground stations were on. and if we had any damage. So those are the things we do monthly.
What I do is, and I'm not required to do it by the FAA, you're probably required maybe by MUS, but I keep a lot more stuff than that. I keep which batteries did I use and how long did I do each battery and what was the temperature of the day and what was the weather like and what was the wind and were there any issues. The FAA certainly wants to know if there was any crashes and stuff, but fortunately when I'm flying stuff that and maybe the Phantoms do the same thing, but I know how many hours are total on a battery, so I don't have any issues with that, and I can tell if cells are bad and stuff like that. But the big reason that I keep track of it, and a lot of us do it, is that if the FAA ever comes in and wants to challenge whether we can fly or not, we have a lot of proof that we've got a lot of time in the air, and we've been really careful of keeping a good log. But mine's in diary form, not in a spreadsheet form. And so I have comments about the flight but a big deal is the temperature. If you're doing a project and the temperature, I've done projects down to -25, and I keep track of that because I want to make sure that I keep my eyes on those batteries. Maybe there could have been some damage from that cold, but that might be something too that they need to keep track of. Because if you're doing a job out there and you leave some batteries in the back seat and you spent the night in the motel, the next morning the batteries are gone.
So I just let's do a little clarification. I think Jen, she probably has to file all those reports due to her COA, which is a requirement of the COA. Under 107, generally you do not have to keep these records that we're talking about, except unless you're going to fly under a waiver, then you have to be able to produce that kind of information. So it's become best practice to keep track of all these things like Steve does.
And honestly, I think that by having all that information stored, that if there's ever any question as to what the pilots before you were doing with it, I mean, there's always a good audit trail as to what that equipment has been doing and what it's been going through. And I mean, your notes for the day could be, it was a real dusty time out here. And so then you got an idea that maybe the motor's got some dust. I mean, there are some things that maybe just should be kept track of because there could be a lot of different pilots using that equipment. So, but Part 107 doesn't require any of it, that's for sure. And the waivers, it's a little different.
I like the way that James put that. I think that was what we could do is really use that language. Here's required and here's best practice.
Yeah, that's real good.
Yeah, you guys bring up some really good points there. And then, so a recommendation sounds like it would be if you're flying on a Part 107, here's the best practices that the state agencies should follow on the information they collect. Under a COA, these other documents required by the FAA. And then, other recommended things to track, maybe things you may want to, like Steve was talking about, that maybe aren't required, but it's a good idea for the continuity of your business to know how many hours you got on your batteries or something like that, right? So Jen, would it be possible for you to do a little bit of a, shall I say, small presentation next meeting of what you guys track and how you go about that for the council? And Steve, if you want to augment that with anything that you track under your business, I think that might be helpful for us to get a better understanding on the recommendation on what kind of documents should be tracked. I know I have somebody from my agency I'd like to attend and listen to that so that we can mature on that. And I know you guys have more mature programs. If anybody else has something they want to share to jump in on that, that'd be great too. Is that something that could be possible?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it works perfect for me because I'm teaching a 107 class next week, and I already have something that I show what's required and then what is recommended. And we put it in terms of risk mitigation, that if there is a problem or someone in the public is unhappy about a flight or tries to make a complaint, we've listed everything, including weather. If there's an issue, like they were flying outside of recommended weather conditions. We have it all recorded.
Oh, that'd be great. That'd be super helpful. So if that's something you can do, then I'll add that to the agenda for next week. We'll have that, and have Steve and anybody else that wants to augment what she talks about with records you collect, if you could come prepared to talk about, here's this, or here's our best practices, or what we think. I think that'll help us a bit in then formulating our recommendation on what state agencies, what the state may require state agencies to track. So it may not be required under 107, which most agencies are going to fly under, but we may want to say, no, if you're flying for the state of Montana, you will be tracking these things. Because we as a state want to minimize our liability and make sure that we're doing due diligence on running these programs. And then what other recommendations we go from there based on the FAA guidance is a little more obvious, but that may be something we want to think about here as we go forward. So anyway, so that will be helpful.
You know, one advantage of this too, and I really like this, is the one big thing that I think is important to avoid, and that is for all of a sudden there to be a demand to add some sort of requirements in the ARM rules, and every state agency has their own administrative rules section. And I would never want to see that, because we're trying to bring some continuity between agencies. And all of a sudden those ARM rules they'd have to be synchronized. It would be an absolute mess. But I think if this is a perfect opportunity to come up with best practices, and so it would, I think, cut off any desire by anybody dreaming about adding this into the official ARM rules. I just see that would be just problematic. So.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I agree. And the FAA portion of that makes that simple for what's required there. It's for the practices for the state agencies. And as an advisory council, all we can do is really recommend that. And then if at some point in the future, the state agencies get together and say, look, or risk management tort, or somebody says, hey, we can't have a bad agency not following this here. We got to make this more policy or something. They can do that. All right, so we're hitting to the end of our time here today. I'm going to jump into the rest part of the agenda briefly here. And as soon as I can find the appropriate document of my 23 documents I got up here. Any other discussion for the council? With the next item on the agenda will be recommendations for next meeting. I think the recommendation is we get a presentation on these different things we need to track so that the council can improve their recommendation there. Any other recommendations council members want to talk about for the next meeting?
No, I like it.
Any other items for discussion? Public comment, as our esteemed public attendee, Mr. Stump, and anything that you want to add or comment on or ask questions on?
No, but thank you very much for letting me sit in. This was really helpful. I'll be at the next one for sure. So thanks again.
Super. No, thanks. Thanks for your experience being in there, and look forward to it. So, all right. Anybody last thoughts? Otherwise, we will plan to meet next week, same time, same station. Oh, there was a request. Shoot, who had it? For scheduling, I meant to talk about this earlier on. Time frame working. Someone else, one of the agencies has their day legislative briefing with their director at noon every day. My department does it at 11 a.m., so I don't have that conflict. I just jump off if they're still going to do the council. Does anybody else have that conflict? And do we want to try to change the time? It's very hard to get a time with everybody. So that agency isn't going to be able to do any noon time, so that doesn't help that. But
I don't have I would prefer to keep it, but I can be flexible to accommodate someone else. My fear is the same as yours, Craig. Finding a new spot that's open for everyone might be a challenge during the session.
Dan or James, anything from you guys?
I'm flexible for whatever I can stay or move to new.
Okay.
Flexible.
Jen, this still works for you?
Yeah. I'd be flexible.
Okay, great. Steve, yeah?
Yeah.
All right, I think we're probably just gonna keep it because it's only once a week. And if agencies have a conflict, they can either send a proxy in or have a proxy sit in their other meeting, depending what's going on. So, because it is gonna be challenging, any other time of day is just gonna get stepped on a lot more, at least from my end of the state government side, with other meetings than the noontime hour. Most people tend to leave that one alone. So thanks for giving us your lunchtime for the council's work. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and conclude this meeting and terminate adjourn. See you all next week.
Okay, thanks. See everybody.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.